Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. I'm Neil Juris, the Senior Director of Communications and Engagement for the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission. You all know us as MORPC. And I'm proud to serve as a member of the CMC Board of Trustees. We would like to thank today's forum sponsors, the Central Ohio Community Improvement Corporation, the Robert Weiler Company, and Homeport, and thank you to our host, the Ellis, for its generous support. We're also grateful to the Center for Human Kindness at the Columbus Foundation and the Columbus Dispatch for presenting our live stream being carried right now on CMC's social media platforms. Let's thank everyone for supporting today's event. Well, welcome to today's sold-out forum. It was all the buzz on social media. Is Snob Zoning America's new redlining? While ostensibly created to maintain good qualities in neighborhoods, single-family zoning has steadily inflated property values and is making America's housing crisis and economic inequality worse. Author Richard Kahlenberg's new book, which we'll have for sale after the forum, because we support small businesses, offers an indictment of America's housing policy. It reveals the social engineering underlying this segregation by economic class and shows what we can do about it. Today, we'll unpack the nationwide implications of single-family zoning, and we'll zoom in on Central Ohio to discuss how exclusive zoning is shutting thousands out from affordable rental and home ownership opportunities. It is my great pleasure to introduce today's distinguished panelists. Please help me welcome Shayla Favor, newly re-elected member of Columbus City Council. Congratulations, Councilwoman. She also serves as chair of the city's Housing Committee. Tahani Mesa Morales, a Family Flourish Program graduate and a Human Resources Generalist with ViaQuest Incorporated. Our host, Amy Clavin, President and CEO of Family Flourish, formerly known as Move to Prosper. Amy will join us at the, oh yes, let's clap for her too. Amy will join us at the podium after our featured speaker makes his remarks. It is now my honor to introduce our featured speaker, Richard D. Kahlenberg, Senior Fellow with the Progressive Policy Institute, non-resident scholar at the Mount Hort School of Public Policy at Georgetown, and author of the new book, Excluded, How Snob Zoning, NIMBYism, and Class Bias Build the Walls We Don't See. Rick was here at our CMC 2 years ago to kick off the Family Flourish Building Inclusive Communities programs in Columbus. We are thrilled to welcome him back to share his latest work. You can all read about it in today's, read all about our panelists in their biographies by scanning the QR code at your tables. Rick, welcome back to CMC.
Thank you so much, Neil. I really appreciate it. And it's great to be back with all of you. I was here, as Neil mentioned, 2 years ago, and I looked out to a room of where I couldn't see anyone's faces. And you know, thank God we're in a different space in our country today. My book, Excluded, really in many ways centers on Columbus, because you all have, in some senses, both the best and the worst of the issue of housing. So on the one hand, there are very high levels of exclusionary zoning in this region. And at the same time, there's some really, really exciting things that are going on here that are drawing on the better impulses that people have. So I was told to limit my remarks to 5 minutes, and so I'm going to try to say 3 things quickly. First, I want to talk about how we got to the place where we are with our housing. We have a system where, in essence, the government has an enormous role, local governments have an enormous role in deciding who gets to live where in America. We have exclusionary zoning laws that are pervasive throughout the country and say that you're welcome to live in this neighborhood so long as you can afford to own a detached single-family home, sometimes with a minimum acreage requirement, half an acre or something like that. And to be clear, I live in a single-family home. I like my hot tub in the backyard. I have nothing against single-family homes, but there is a question to be raised about exclusionary policies that tell me that none of the neighbors can make a different choice and build a duplex or a triplex. That would be illegal throughout many parts of the country. So sometimes exclusionary practices are more subtle. So in some communities, including in this area, you will have an allowance for some multifamily housing in a more affluent community, but there are strict requirements about what goes on the outside of the housing. So there has to be a brick facade, for example. And that's designed for aesthetic reasons in part, but it also is in some ways clearly exclusionary because there are people who would never be able to afford even multifamily housing when you put those requirements on. The origins of these policies are pretty dark. So it began in places like Baltimore and Louisville in the early 20th century, where we had racial zoning. It was illegal for black people to move to predominantly white neighborhoods by law. And the mayor of Baltimore gave two explanations for the law. And he used this word, that would quarantine black people. The first was that he wanted to reduce the spread of communicable diseases. So sit with that for a minute. That was a policy that the mayor of Baltimore was advocating and enacted into law. And the other rationale, which will have a more familiar ring to us today, is that he was trying to protect the property values of white families. So those were the two reasons. The Supreme Court struck that law down in 1917, but then we quickly morphed to economic zoning, which is what we have today. So there was a proliferation of these laws that said we will ban anything but a single family home. So as we morphed from racial zoning to economic zoning, we see that effects in the trends. So with the passage of the Fair Housing Act in 1968, there has been a 30% decline in racial segregation in America, which is a positive step. It's still, racial segregation is still way too high, but at least we're headed in the right direction. With the proliferation of snob zoning, we've seen, since passage of the 68 Fair Housing Act, a doubling of income segregation. So rich people are much more likely to live separate and apart from middle-class people, and low-income people are much more likely to live separate and apart from middle-class people. So second thing I wanted to talk about briefly is why we should care. It imposes all sorts of harms, and I'll just mention three quickly. First is it does drive economic segregation, which is bad for social mobility and bad for our democracy when people of different backgrounds don't get a chance to know one another as neighbors. Secondly, and this is what you hear most about, it artificially drives up the price of housing. Now, this is one of those weird areas where I've found there are these supply and demand deniers, people who will say, well, no, zoning has nothing to do with the cost of housing. But it's, just think back to during COVID when we had the price of used cars skyrocketing. My wife took advantage of that. She got rid of one of our cars. We profited from that moment. But it was a supply chain issue. And in essence, we have a permanent version of the supply chain issue where we have government artificially limiting the supply of housing and making housing too expensive. And the third problem with it is that it is bad for the environment. When housing becomes unaffordable, people have to live, they search further and further out in the periphery of metropolitan areas, which means more greenhouse gases from cars. Now, in Columbus, you have high levels, in this region, I should say, you have high levels of exclusionary zoning. And in the book, I cite the research of Patricia Burgess on the ways in which Columbus the area consciously sought to segregate by economic status and by race. And as a result, Columbus is, according to one study, had it was the second most economically segregated region in the country after the Austin area of cities or regions with 1 million or more people. Secondly, you've got very low levels of social mobility here. Raj Chetty did a study about 8 years ago which found that of the 50 largest communities in the country, Columbus ranked 45th in terms of social mobility. So if you're born poor, you're much less likely to rise out of that. And that's related directly, Chetty found, to issues of economic segregation. And thirdly, I don't need to tell you all that the housing prices are increasing in the Columbus area, which is really harmful for people who have to choose between making rent and buying medicine for their kids. And also today has become more politically salient because even college-educated people who have thought they were doing everything right, everything that society had asked them of them, are having a really hard time affording housing. So what can be done? The third point, if Columbus is central to the national challenge around housing, I think you also are pointing to some solutions. And Families Flourish is one of those solutions. It provides, in essence, a catapult over these exclusionary walls that we've built in communities and provides families who want to choose to try something different, that opportunity. And I know Tahani will talk about her experience with the program. And then in terms of broader reforms, I'm really encouraged that the city of Columbus is engaging in what I understand to be the first effort at zoning reform in 70 years. So better late than never. But I want to emphasize in closing that this is a regional problem. And the worst forms of exclusionary zoning are often in suburban areas. And so everyone has to do their part here. Now, before I end, I'll just note, probably on everyone's mind is, well, what about the politics of this? This is very, very difficult. But I have run out of time. No, we are going to address that issue, I think, in our discussion. So just hold that thought. I'll just say they're interesting. The politics are interesting, not as bad as they used to be for trying to make change. Thank you.
Special accommodations for somebody who's kind of short. So it's great to see everybody here today. Thank you for being here and for having the largest attendance in this new space. So welcome. Rick, thank you for sharing some of the key concepts in your new book, Excluded, and we're excited that Families Flourish is in there. It's in there as our prior name, Move to Prosper. We changed our name recently. So let's hear from our panel. Councilmember Favor, I'm going to start with you, and first congratulate you for taking on the challenge of after 70 years looking at the rezoning. So City of Columbus is undergoing an overhaul of its zoning code. We applaud you for this work. Tell us how this zoning rewrite will help solve Central Ohio's housing shortage and create more inclusive neighborhoods for people of all economic backgrounds.
Well, thank you for the question. Thank you for extending the invitation for me to be here today. Housing is such an important topic for me. It's very personal. If you have heard me speak about housing, I bring a lot of passion to the conversation. And really, it's because I know the history of housing in this country. I had the honor of teaching a course now 2 years ago at Denison that I created called Ghetto by Design. And it really centers around the reality that our communities just did not come to be just by happenstance or just by sheer luck or just because somebody's grandfather picked themselves up by their bootstraps. This was government intervention that helped to create and shape the communities that are designated as ghettos today or designated as suburban communities. And so if government, state interaction, intervention got us to these places, coupled with actors, folks in our banking and mortgage and real estate industry helped to get us to this place, well then far be it from us to think that regular old folks are going to be able to pull themselves up by the bootstraps and get themselves out of it. And so that is why I believe that it's incredibly important for government to lean into the conversation. A lot of the history of housing, of zoning, it is very uncomfortable because it is centered around race. And race does make people uncomfortable in this country. But we have to have the hard conversations in order for us not to continue to repeat the atrocities of the past. And so that's why I'm excited for our zoning rewrite. You're absolutely correct. It's been 70 plus years since we've had a comprehensive update to our zoning code. Now, the zoning update is not going to be the silver bullet that's going to solve our housing crisis in this community. That's why it's coupled with the housing policies that you see before you on your table. We won't have an opportunity to get through all of them, but this really does give you a tune into what we are doing at City Council to address our housing crisis, and not just our housing crisis. We don't have time to do it, but it's our eviction crisis, and it's now our budding homelessness crisis in our community. All of these things interact with each other, and they have been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. So what the zoning code update will do will help to right this ship, if you will, to some degree. It will help make new developments that much quicker to get online, so that we're not having to fight for each site having specific things included in them like we are every Monday. It's going to make mobility and getting around our communities that much quicker. Equity can be built into this plan, and these are all policies that we uphold, at the City of Columbus. Now it's time for us to memorialize them and make sure that they're embedded in our code.
Thank you. So Rick, now to you. Is zoning code rewriting a solution you've seen work toward creating more inclusive housing opportunities in other cities? And if so, can you share some examples?
Sure. So first of all, let me echo what Shayla has said. I mean, so much in there that was so powerful. This was segregation by design, and communities can seek to undo that. And so Minneapolis, I'll give you as one example, they're kind of the first place, first major city to take on exclusionary zoning. And they did it in part by referring to the history. They looked at the redlining maps, which you're all familiar with, the maps that the government had to disinvest from black communities. And they overlay those maps with the current maps for what I'm calling snob zoning. And it was the mirror opposite, basically. Single-family only homes in the Minneapolis area were those that were green-lined, or those more affluent communities. And they looked at it and they said, we have a situation where 14 of the 15 highest performing schools, thank you, Amy, are located in these single-family only communities, and they're off limits to people who can't afford a single-family home. And they said these things don't sit right with us, and they had a situation where 70% of the land was allocated to single-family homes only, and they said we're going to legalize duplexes and triplexes throughout those areas in one fell swoop. Usually these battles go, community by community. This was one big step. They did a number of other things, and I'm going to agree with you again, Shayla. This is not a silver bullet, the zoning piece, but they did a number of other things, including support for subsidized homes and more development near transit. And it has had a profound impact in Minneapolis. There was a headline recently in Bloomberg that Minneapolis was the one city that had tamed inflation. And they said that it had tamed inflation because they were allowing more housing. And housing is, a huge chunk of the cost of living for any family. By increasing the supply of housing, they had decreased the rate of increase in rents. And that was what accounted for the fact that Minneapolis had tamed inflation. So it can have really, really positive effects, and it takes a little bit of time, but this happened pretty quickly after the 2015 intervention.
So I know there's a lot of members of city councils here in the audience. Hopefully you can look at Minneapolis as an example and get some ideas. So thank you. So Rick, in your book, you state that every municipality benefits by having opportunities for people of all incomes, races, and cultures to live, work, play, and contribute in their community. You say that this benefits everyone, especially children in school. Can you explain why this matters for both adults and children?
Sure, and this gets to the politics question. The immediate issue is in the exclusive suburbs, what's in it for us? We like the situation the way it is. Why should we change? And I think one answer to that is that the people in exclusive, predominantly white communities are missing out on so much of what makes America great. I mean, this is a country that has people from all corners of the world, and when we wall ourselves off from others, we miss out on all of that the rich benefits of diversity. Many of you probably travel, if you can afford to do so. Travel to other countries. You want to learn about other cultures. You want to learn about their food. You want to learn about their music. And when we have this resource in this country where we could be all learning from one another, and instead there's this manufactured segregation. In terms of kids, that's probably the most profound impact. There is a wide body of research to suggest that, in essence, diversity makes us smarter. That when children are exposed to novel ideas that come from people who have a different set of life experiences, the learning is deeper and richer. And finally, I would say that if you're trying to prepare your kids to work in the 21st century workforce, you're going to have to be able to get along with people of all different backgrounds. And by building these walls that rob children of the chance of learning how to navigate in a diverse world, you're not doing those kids any favors.
So thank you for that, and that's a good segue to Tahani. So I've known Tahani for 5 years and have had the privilege of watching her children grow up, and it's been wonderful seeing the changes. So you wanted a different choice for your family than what was available a few years back. Tell us about your decision to participate in Move to Prosper, which is now Families Flourish. What did you learn from the experience, and how has the choice that you made changed your family's lives?
Well, I learned a lot. It's been 5 years. I graduated from the program about 1.5 years ago, now going on, right? A little bit of backstory. I've been divorced. I have 3 children. Currently, ages 17. She'll be 18, graduating and planning on attending OSU come next fall. And 15 and now 8. We were living in a we had a private landlord at the time, and 2 bedrooms upstairs and 1 downstairs. Baby and I shared a room, and my daughter had the basement. There were, stairs were broken. There were bugs this big in the basement, so she would never actually be able to sleep in her room, among other things. There was a hit and run across the street from my house after I left for work one morning at 5 a.m. I left for work one morning at 5 a.m. to only witness a drug deal being had 5 minutes outside of my home, as I was leaving my house. So the kids they weren't allowed to play outside. They weren't allowed to do much of anything after they got home from school. They couldn't be involved in extracurriculars. They weren't allowed to participate in extracurriculars because I worked, and there was no way for me to get them to and from where they needed to be. So unfortunately, they were just kind of stuck at home, my oldest 2 babysitting the youngest. And I was working all the extra hours I could just to afford the rent, make sure they had food. And this was 5 years ago. Keep in mind, inflation is not any better, has not made life any easier for anyone. So 5 years ago, this is where I was. I was barely making maybe $20,000 a year, I think, at the time. So I was working overtime so that I could just put food in their mouths. My sister, being a social worker, she saw an ad for the program, and she said, "You should apply for this." And I was like, okay. I think we had, I want to say over 300 applications with the very first set, and I was like, there's no way that I'm going to be picked. But I applied, worst case scenario, right? Worst case thing to tell is no. I was accepted into the program, only by the grace of God, I think, and we moved into our new home about 6 months later. Kids were enrolled in a new school. They were able to do extracurricular activities. I had a coach who was at my side. She was kind of my conscience. First of all, slow down, stop, and smell the roses. We're here for you. We can help you. That's one. Because if you don't stop and you don't take care of yourself, which is what I was not doing, I didn't have time. I barely had time to bathe and brush my teeth every day. So no, I was not taking care of myself. I was making sure they were taken care of, and it was just the basics. When I got into the program, one of the big things we focused on was taking care of yourself as a mom, taking care of your family second, because if you don't, you're not going to be around for them when they really need you. So then I started to see things with my children, the things they wanted to do. My oldest, she did color guard all 4 years of high school. One of the reasons that she considered not going to OSU is because they don't have a color guard. My youngest, she is in ballet, she's in jazz. She is doing the Nutcracker next week. If any of you guys want to go to Otterbein and see the Nutcracker put on by 6-year-olds and 7-year-olds. My middle child, he's football, wrestling. They have been able to do all of those things simply by joining the program. Not only that, I'm making probably 4 times what I was making by joining the program. With them being able to be safe, I felt comfortable knowing that they were safe, knowing that, in my area, in my apartment complex, they weren't going to get hit by a car because they crossed the street, knowing that there weren't drug deals going on outside my house, at least not that I could see. I mean, every area has its issues, but at least there weren't, it wasn't so blatant that nobody was afraid to get caught, to get into trouble, that they were going to be okay. They would get off the bus, they would go do their activities, being able to work less, make more money, work less, because I didn't have to work 12 hours a day to pay the rent. Rent was higher, don't get me wrong, rent is still higher and it goes up consistently, but I'm not working 15 hours a day to pay the rent. I'm working my 8, I'm going home, picking them up, we're having dinner together, we're doing things on the weekend. I don't have to have 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet. Really, the biggest thing that I've learned, take care of yourself, make sure the bills are paid, and take care of the kids. I think that is, that's what it all boils down to. They're happy, they're healthy, and we're in just so much better place than we were 5.5 years ago.
Thank you. So Tahani, can you share real quick a story you've told before about the impact of having the rental support, that it enabled you to apply for jobs? I think that's important to share.
Absolutely. So I think we were living off of 161 with our private landlord. We were living off of 161, maybe Carl Road area. We were paying $600 a month. $600 a month, obviously, is not a lot of rent. I don't even think there's an apartment that exists for $600 a month right now. So you can imagine the situation there. My current rent is almost $1,400. But had I tried to pay rent at $1,400 5 years ago, we probably would have been evicted every month, if even being able to get into the apartment. Once you get that first eviction, you're not going to get another one. So having that rental support and then being able to slow down, think, well, what can I do to get another job? Because I was also working hourly. So I'm thinking many of you here are salaried. I was an hourly employee, which means I punched in at 6 a.m. and I punched out at 1 p.m. or 1:30. I punched in for lunch and I punched out. I'm now salaried, which means that, in so many words, they pay me the week as long as I do my job, right? So there's so much flexibility. Even when I left that first hourly job, because I had to take, in order to get a better job, I had to take time out of my hourly job. So they were either not going to pay me or I was going to take my vacation time, which means I couldn't take the extra time to spend with my kids. So what do I do? There aren't a lot of options when you only have, you're only getting that little bit of time. So when I was able to get my first salary job and I had that flexibility, I remember a weekend to the job, my daughter broke her arm. And I said, I cannot come into the office. My daughter's arm is broken. My boss said, okay, fine, work from home. I was so relieved that being able to do what I need to do for her, being able to do what I need to do for me and still be able to make money, that's an amazing feeling.
Thank you. Do you have something you'd like to add?
I am so incredibly excited that programs like Move to Prosper, Families Flourish, and the ones that are identified in the book, they absolutely exist. But this should stir something up in all of us, right? It should stir something up that one would have to move to another community to obtain the resources that many of us take advantage of today: access to grocery shopping and fresh foods, healthy schools, good paying jobs. This should stir something up in us to the point where we are moved to action. And while I am so incredibly excited that this has been such a positive example of how important the program is, how can we continue to duplicate that over and over throughout our country? It would be essentially to putting a Band-Aid over a gunshot wound. And we have to deal with the wounds of our community. And so that's doing a rezoning update. It's updating inequitable housing policies that have created segregation in our community, not just racial segregation, but economic segregation in our community. It's dealing with all of the issues that we have not yet to grapple with in our community. which is why I threw my name in the hat for city council, because we want to have those hard conversations and talk about those things in our community. So that's what was stirring up in me when I was listening to your amazing testimony.
So thank you, Councilwoman. And we share that we need to do both, though, and that it just takes so long to change the zoning codes and then to build the housing and to get people in and for rents to come down. How do we today enable families like Tahani and others have the benefits for their children and generations to come? So I got the signal. We'll move to questions from our live stream and in-person audiences in just a few minutes. If you have a question, please make your way over to the microphone now. It's in the back. And if you're watching online, please type your questions into the chat. Before we take questions, I have one final question for each of you. So this is a question for each. Can programs like Families Flourish make an impact on leveling the playing field for underserved residents throughout the region? Please explain.
Yeah, absolutely. I think part of the reason I wanted to write about what is now Families Flourish in my book is that there was a clear before and after story. And Tahani, I remember when you said, I think it was someone stole the little play swing set from your front porch. I mean,
And when I started the program, Buggy that's the little one. She was under 2. She had a, little, we had gotten it, I think my mom bought it from a secondhand store. So it was already secondhand, and she's got a little slide, and it's got a little swing, just really small plastic, one of those. I left for work one day, came home, and it was gone.
right.
Just like that.
So this was a very, very tough situation, and then to hear about how your life had and the life of your kids had improved was very powerful to me. And I will agree with you, Shayla, that this is at the same time a small program, a necessary program, an important program, but that there have to be systemic reforms as well, so that we're addressing the issues in the city of Columbus. And I think you said, Amy, you had 1,100 people apply for 33 spots in the most recent round. So people are looking for change. And that has to happen with programs like Families Flourish. It has to happen with investments in Columbus. And then I think the third piece of it is tearing down these walls in the suburbs, because Families Flourish is providing an opportunity for a small number of families, an important number of families to have better lives. But ultimately, we have to address the systematic exclusion of families from opportunity. And we know, Tahani, your experience is well replicated in the research that low-wage families and their kids can do amazing things if given the opportunity. But right now, we have these structures in place that prevent that from happening. And those structures are not inevitable. Something can be done about it.
I just wanted to kind of add to that. Her babysitting place was gone. Somebody took it off of her porch. My kids have had the same set of bikes on my back porch now for probably 3 years, and they're still there, even though they'd like an upgrade. I have said no, because your bike still works.
I would say yes, a resounding yes. Programs like Family Flourish absolutely do change the game. We're hearing a testimony of it today. But it's both, though, right? Columbus is, every day, over 40 people move to the city of Columbus. We're the only city that is growing in the state of Ohio, the only growing city in the Midwest. We are going to double in the next 20 to 30 years. And so it is imperative that we get this right now. And it is imperative that Columbus continue to be a leader in dismantling these walls around the region that is known as Central Ohio, because I don't want to see anyone displaced. right? The reason why Columbus is the way that it is, it's because of the people that are already here. And so if we are not doing everything that we can to take care of the people that made Columbus what it is, and why folks like, and companies like an Intel wants to move here, then we are doing a disservice to this community, only thinking about the folks that are going to move here in the future. And so it's both. We've got to do both.
Thank you for that. So thank you so much. It's Columbus Metropolitan Club's long-standing tradition to take audience questions. Mantra Moody with CMC is curating questions from our live stream audience. For those of you with us in person, please join Mantra at the microphone. Out of respect for others, please keep your questions brief, and please keep your responses brief because we're running short, and to the point as much as possible. Please also keep in mind that questions do end with a question mark. Mantra, what's the first audience question?
All right, thank you, Amy. First question is from Phil Flanagan. The tax abatements are chasing low-income renters out in favor of a more exclusive class of residents. How can we center the margins in our city's development?
Can you repeat that, please?
Sure. So the tax abatements are chasing low-income renters out in favor of a more exclusive class of residents. How can we center the margins in our city's development?
I will take that question. So if everyone is not aware, last year, the city of Columbus did rework its CRA and tax incentive policy. There is a portion in the book that talks about what gentrification actually does look like as it is today. But the reality is that the policy that we had in place did create an opportunity for folks of significant low income to be displaced in our community. So now as it stands today, if someone is going to receive a tax incentive in our community, we're going to talk about multifamily first, then that developer must ensure that 20% of those units meet a certain income, and that would be at 80% of the area median income, or 60%. Or what that developer can do is extend the amount of units, and we would go from 20 to now 30% of the units. So what we're doing is essentially going deeper into the area median income, so to reach a lower income resident, or extending the amount of units that would be included in that property. As it relates to single family development, anyone could move into a neighborhood like mine on the Near East Side and redevelop that property and receive a tax abatement, and it could be market rate. That does not exist any longer in the city of Columbus. Now, if you're going to receive that tax incentive, that property must be income qualified, and that person who is going to own that property must make 120% of the area median income or below. So we are riding this ship, as you will, to address the question that was asked.
Councilmember Favor, it's great to see you again after the big table event last month. And my name's Brian Urbanski with the Aubrey Affordable Housing Foundation. We provide low-cost shared living solutions to members of vulnerable populations, particularly folks coming home after incarceration. And I agree with you that this building overhaul has been a long time coming, and that's great. But my question is, are there any creative or outside-the-box solutions we can implement today while those units are coming online in the years ahead?
Thank you for that question, and great to see you again. So I would invite everyone. We have a housing hearing coming up this Monday. I'm looking at Sandeepti. I don't know the time, but it's Monday at 2 o'clock. Thank you, 2:30. And we just hosted another one about 2 weeks ago that talks about all of the policies that we're looking to implement over the next 6 to 8 months, one of which is an accessory dwelling unit pilot program, also spoken about in the book as well. That is going to be a quick, out-of-the-box fix, if you will, that can address some affordability in communities. So it's going to take what's already on a lot. Think of, on the Near East Side, we have carriage houses. Taking that carriage house, putting turning that into a residential unit. So some people call them grandmother units, or a unit that could be for a young person or someone who might be transient at this point in time in their life. But what we're trying to do is just double the amount of capacity that a unit can have right now, a lot could have. And so that's one pilot program that we're looking to implement in the next few months in the city of Columbus.
I'm so glad to hear that you're doing that. I mean, it can make an enormous difference. In Los Angeles, they legalized, the term is accessory dwelling units, these small backyard units or garage units, and the number has exploded in Los Angeles. So there was a lot of demand for these smaller units that wasn't being met, and it can make a big difference. And it can also lead to broader changes. So in Minneapolis, which I was talking about earlier, that was their first step, was to legalize ADUs. And there was one council member who was very scared about the program. She said, they're going to become houses of prostitution. This was the concern. And when that didn't happen, then that kind of made people feel a little more relaxed about change and led to further change.
The reason why that is a quick fix, because as it is today, that accessory dwelling unit would have to come through the zoning committee. And that would be a whole process in and of itself for the resident who owns the property. They would have to go through our process, which you all know is cumbersome. And so what we're trying to do is streamline that. So you've got a couple of different zoning plans that are already laid out. An owner could potentially pick one. It's already been approved, and then you're good to go.
People don't know, ADU is accessory dwelling unit, and there are some cities across the country that provide funding to help reduce the cost, either loans or grants, to make them more affordable. Next question, thank you.
All right, Amy Bush Stephen asks, what can affluent neighborhoods do to improve access to affordable housing in their areas?
YIMBY, become a YIMBY. Literally. So we hosted a Housing for All annual town forum back in July this summer, and we had a dynamic speaker from the YIMBY movement. It's Yes in My Backyard. It's the counter to NIMBY folks, No in My Backyard. And it is really a movement that I have embraced. I'm trying to get it stirred up here in Columbus. But it's really about getting folks excited about projects that not just impact their day-to-day or 100 feet from their door, but projects that impact the community overall. And with a resounding yes, showing up to zoning meetings, showing up to council meetings, or whatever it might be in your community, and saying, yes, we want this in our community. So that is one way in which you can start to lean into the conversation. And then also just educating your fellow neighbors about what this looks like to have different types of housing units in your community that may not have existed in the past. So whether we're talking about a tiny home or a rail box home or an accessory dwelling unit, I believe it all starts with education.
Thank you.
Did you say there's a Neighbors for More Neighbors chapter here? You're for Neighbors for More Neighbors. Excellent. Okay, and I just wanted to call out the brilliance of that particular name for a YIMBY organization, because it just says it all, that the people who want to come into the community are going to be neighbors, and why not emphasize our shared humanity rather than continually emphasize exclusion.
Hi, my name is Barb Seckler, and this question is for Council Member Sheila Favor. It's really clear to everybody that City Council has taken a deep dive into housing and is changing policy and doing a lot of good things. And my question to you is, as you look forward for the vision going forward with Intel and all the different things, how will you partner with the Affordable Housing Trust and Homeport and Families Flourish? How will you help draw together the rich and the poor, the economic inequity, so that we have some mixed income neighborhoods where families live together that aren't all rich and aren't all poor, and that middle class gets to perhaps be in programs like this woman or others? Thank you.
That's a great question. You know, I think that it starts with policy. So we'll point to source of income as being that top one, and shout out to Amy, who we started these conversation pandemic. We were all wearing masks. I think the hearing was online. But that essentially is helping to ensure that no matter what your source of income may be, and the thing that makes me always chuckle when I talk about source of income is that folks automatically go to Section 8. But we're talking about sources that might come from alimony. It could come from child support. But it's the automatic inclination that we are only focusing on low-income residents. And so in the city of Columbus and now around the region, for the most part, you cannot be discriminated from obtaining somewhere to live just based upon how you pay that rent. As long as it's legal, right, you can no longer be discriminated. And that was happening in our community. There absolutely are signs that say no Section 8 here, no vouchers here. In fact, we had recently, this past year, an apartment complex that catered to our new American communities on the north side of Columbus that had issued a letter to all of the residents stating that moving forward, they were not going to accept Section 8 vouchers in that apartment complex. This would have displaced a ridiculous amount of new Americans in our community. Now, it is already challenging for low-income residents to find housing. You slap new American onto that and the challenge of not speaking the language, that further disadvantages someone from obtaining safe and habitable housing. And so now, because that policy had already passed, we were able to send a very delicate letter to that property manager, and those folks could stay in their homes. And so that is just one success story of how we can begin to truly create mixed income communities by ensuring that there are policies in place to protect folks as they are right now.
Thank you, and thank you for your leadership. And hopefully to other city council members here, do it in your cities if you haven't already done it, and thank you to those who have. One very quick question and very, very quick answer.
Okay, thank you so much for this conversation. I've attended a number of the zoning meetings, and most of the conversation has been around housing types and housing density. Is there a way we can maybe make it a bigger conversation around places and neighborhoods?
Absolutely, and part of the strategy with these zoning conversations has been having them in communities across the city of Columbus. So not just hosting them down at City Hall, but hosting them in the King Lincoln, hosting them on the west side, so that we can center neighborhoods and how incredibly important it is going to be for us to lean into updating our zoning code so that we can create truly walkable communities where we can all flourish. So thank you for that question.
So it's time for me to wrap up. I'm getting that signal from Doug, thank you. So I hope when you leave here, you'll all become YIMBYs, join the Neighbors for More Neighbors movement. There are people here who you can talk with about it. And advocate for inclusivity and programs that level the playing field so that all families have the agency to create their own futures. If you'd like to continue this conversation, whether you're online, whether you're here, there's so much we didn't cover. Tomorrow night, we're holding an event at CCAD. Rick will be the speaker. We have 2 people on a panel with him. It'll be a fabulous conversation. Mayor Coleman, who's here with us tonight, will be with us tomorrow night, as well as Franklin County Treasurer Cheryl Brooks Sullivan. So you can learn more by going to the familiesflourish.org website, and then you can register. Tickets are free, so hope to see you tomorrow. Thank you.
I have heels on today. Okay, so I hope everyone found today's forum insightful and a bit encouraging. Although we've made some progress, we know there's much more work that needs to be done to help accommodate the growing needs of our region. So thank you so much to today's sponsors, the Central Ohio Community Improvement Corporation, the Robert Weiler Company, and Homeport, and thank you to the Ellis for its support. We also want to thank our virtual seat patrons and the Center for Human Kindness at the Columbus Foundation and the Columbus Dispatch for presenting today's live stream. And our very special appreciation for today's panelists, Councilwoman Shayla Favor, Richard D. Kahlenberg, Tahani Mesa Morales, and our host, Amy Claiborne. Let's give a round of applause. So please register now to join us next Wednesday, which I'm sure is going to be sold out as well, here at the Ellis for Reimagining a Style Giant, featuring Victoria's Secret board chair Donna James and the terrific panel that will be before us. Don't forget, you can purchase an autographed copy of Rick's new book before you leave out today, courtesy of the Book Loft. And thank you again, everyone. We could not do this without you, so have a great afternoon.